Hello, world. Welcome to another episode of the Fourth Heritage Mindset. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome my good friend Gordon, who wrote the foreword to my third book, Beyond the Fourth Heritage. Without wasting time, let me welcome Gordon. So, Gordon, you're most welcome to the Fourth Heritage Mindset. Can you say hello to my viewers and maybe introduce yourself?
Absolutely, and thank you so much,
yeah,
if I may say, Kesa.
it was sunny. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while since we talked, and
Mm,
what I've been doing recently is I've been working as an ethical futurist. So my work really now looks at coaching
mm,
visionary leaders,
mhm,
like many of your viewers, perhaps your listeners.
mhm, mhm,
And I work with them to bring together some of the aspects of the future, like AI,
mm,
technology, automation, global socioeconomic change, with the ethics that underpin that, especially in such
mm,
an exponentially fast moving world. So, what are the values that we're operating with? What is right and wrong? Is there even a right and wrong in the world? Like, how do we go
mm,
about things? We know, especially in
mm,
business,
mm,
and I'm actually in a business school. I know yourself, you just graduated from business school. And,
mm,
we're very much looking at, with the speed of change, how can we approach, this new world? So that's really where the ethical futurism comes in.
Oh, good. And you in Austin, Texas right now?
Yes, yeah.
Uh,
The body is in Austin, Texas. The
uh,
accent is from Northern Ireland. So, but I
mhm,
really think it's important now that we all got to think of the dualism of the left and right energies
mm,
of the world. The
mhm,
structure, and you talk about this in your books, right? Some of the structural, kind of systems are inside of, but then the humanity, and how do you
mm,
bring them together into one unified
mm.
structure, and
Wow.
what lies underneath that consciously. And this is a lot of,
Mm,
what I
mm,
really loved about Beyond the Fourth Heritage, actually, if you don't
mm.
mind me kind of segueing
Oh,
into
sure, sure. Yeah,
that.
let's get into it. Let's get into it. Gordon, you are so most welcome on this channel because you were the first person who read my draft and you wrote me the forward to this draft. And I put your name right here just for viewers to know. Yeah, I got this line from your forward. So I really appreciate the partnership. But how could you summarize this book for my viewers beyond the fourth heritage?
Well, that's always a great question, right? Trying to summarize that. I actually say in the forward,
Mm,
the book deals with no less than humanity. Like it, to
mm,
me, if you want to look at humanity, a lot of us start with the Greeks. I'm kind
mm,
of, getting deeper into philosophy now myself, with
mhm,
ethics and meta
mm,
ethics and what's right and wrong and so forth.
mm,
And I think that, any of us looking at the world, could really do well to read the Beyond the Fourth Heritage first. I actually like as a sequence. I know it kind of comes
yeah.
later, but, um, it really summarizes, the arc of human existence, from Africa, and looking at the stages of,
Mhm,
like, what's the system we're inside of, what's the context we're inside of, and then,
mm,
then looking to the future. Well, what would the next, structure? So I think, in summary, if you want to start, understanding the future, which is coming at us exponentially fast,
mm,
then this book allows us to really look at the past and the structures that have, we currently believe most of humanity in the current
mm,
strain came out of, somewhere in eastern part of Africa. We know. So I think the book really addresses,
mm,
the development of civilization, and more importantly,
mm.
the philosophy, like the way of thinking about
The
how
way
we
of
are
thinking.
civilizing.
Yeah.
So, it, it's a subtly powerful book. And the last thing I'll say about the summary
Mm,
is that it's also personal, for you. And I think that
mm,
really brings a new aspect
mm,
to, this area, because people have talked about Africa, they've talked about, the European sort of
uh-huh,
invasion, basically, and many different
mm,
things. So, I think you're bringing your personal viewpoint plus all these others. It really overlaps a lot of the
mm,
Venn diagram circles and gives a
mm,
much richer, center to it. So yeah, that would
Wow.
be my long-winded
Yeah.
summary of
Wow. No,
the
I appreciate that summary, especially your last point. Yeah, because I subtitle the book "A Personal View." So it's good you touch on that point, because when you read this whole book, it's knowledge areas, knowledge sources, but I'm bringing my personal view in terms of a little boy born in Eastern Africa, and through science and through reading spirituality, I know both science says humanity is from Eastern Africa, and even the Bible also talks about the rivers of Garden of Eden being in the East Africa. So I think the spirituality and science, I feel as someone from the soil, that these things can be reconciled in the way you structure your brain and your spirituality. We are all from Africa, and we can civilize and also have religion or spirituality based on that fact.
even though we're talking more about civilization, I mean, where does that
Mm,
come from? A civilization, was based
mm,
on kind of the biology, the ecology, the
mhm.
environment, which is based
Environment.
on. So it's life occurs in layers down to this kind of sub-quantum kind of unified layer that unified field
Mm,
of physics actually is
mm,
experimentally talking about. And so I
mm.
think a lot of this kind of
Well,
structured approach of how you have in Beyond the Fourth Heritage, looked
mm,
at society. If you keep going down deeper and you end up in
mm,
physics and you go
eh,
deeper into like we start to get into this field of energy, which is sort of, you sort of
mm.
touch,
Yeah, I touch it.
a little bit on that, that there's this whole energy that we're all inside of, and we can
Mm,
control and access it. And
mm,
I think your personal viewpoint brought that out too, how you
mm,
access something deep inside of you several times in your life to kind of
mm,
shift and change like the
mm.
outcome at the more relative higher level. So I
Yep.
think the depth of the energy is of how we guide our own lives at a personal
Mm,
level is
mm.
probably identical to how the whole universe works from a kind of physics level.
Wow, wow. That's a very strong point. I hope people can grasp that. Yeah, yeah. The
Yeah,
fact that
yeah.
what you meant. Can you repeat it again?
Yeah, I think the most simple way to say it is a
Mm,
couple of points. Number one, all life on Earth
mm,
occurs in layers.
uh,
In layers.
yeah.
So the top layer is just what we experience, and then it's underneath that. If you were to zoom
Mm,
in, you go deeper and deeper through through
mhm,
biology into chemistry and deeper into atoms, and then the
mhm,
subatomic, and all the way down, and then you're in the world of physics. And so in
mm,
that
mm,
physics world, we know that underlying everything, literally from the deepest, most theoretical science that we have, that there's a field. There's a field of energy that
bit
everything
of it.
comes from, and it's very, very
Mm,
simple, very subtle, and
mm,
insanely powerful. It kind of substantiates what
mm,
you're talking about with society, because in Beyond the Fourth Heritage and all your books, in
mm,
fact, there's this
mm,
underlying personal energy,
mm,
because
mm.
we're part of that same.
Thanks for that. My
Mm.
second question, maybe formal, I would like to ask you is, what, I don't know if you've already mentioned it, but what would be that memorable idea or two from the book that you're like, you know what, I got this from Beyond the Fourth Edge for you? What's
Yeah,
that memorable idea?
I just got really addicted to the Harry,
Mm.
like just because we don't often,
Mm,
get down to some sort of structure. Like we sort of
mm,
think civilization, people wandered
mm,
around, they found a
mm,
river, they, hung out beside it. Then it was
mm,
better to, store things and have agriculture rather than being nomadic. And
mhm,
when you think about civilizations, and there's actually some studies are now coming out to say this is not how life on Earth was at all. It was much
mm,
more randomized,
mhm,
and
mhm.
there wasn't this nice linear progression. But
Yeah.
I think correct me if I'm wrong, and it's been a while
Mm.
since I read the book, but it's like 12. There were kind of 12 steps of
Hypoth Hypothesis.
hypotheses.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
have
so
12
that's
hypotheses.
yeah,
Mm,
so that's really what stood out for me, was the 12
mm,
hypotheses
mm,
and how they build one on the other
mhm,
and
mhm,
interconnect together. Because I
mm,
don't think many people
mm,
can structure. I mean, you're probably talking about thousands, if not millions of years, right? I mean,
mm, mm,
thousands for sure.
mm,
So I think I always like when there's a structure, just like in the physics example, right? When there's a
Yeah.
structure, because
Mm.
that shows intelligence, right?
Yeah.
We know that there's an intelligence running nature. Why? Well,
Mm.
because trees don't grow
Mhm.
horizontally; they all grow
Wow.
vertically. If you say a
Mm.
tree, its roots and the leaves.
Mm.
If you say cat, it's more or less this certain type of thing, whether it's a
Mm.
tiger or a house cat. So
Mm. Wow.
um, I think that the
Yeah.
structure
Okay.
gives you access to an intelligence. Why
Mm.
don't cats have 5 legs? Like, why don't
Mm.
trees grow horizontally? Why is gravity like this?
Yeah.
And but it
Mm.
also gets into divinity as well, because you're like, well, okay, this is designed,
Mm.
so where's the designer? So anyway, just getting back to answer your question, I think that
Mm.
the nice
Yeah.
structure that you gave gives a really nice way to look at more
Yeah.
abstractly the concrete specifics, regardless
Mm.
of how history may tell us, life is or was.
Mm. Wow. Good. Yeah. For the viewers who haven't read Beyond the Fourth Heritage, the structure he's talking about are the 12 hypotheses. I have 12 chapters pretty much, divided in 3 sections. But the first hypothesis number one is that the origin of all humans is in Africa. And then I build on that. Hypothesis number two, even if the origin of all humans is in Africa, then I bring in religion and civilization. And then I go up to hypothesis number 12, which I subtitle Triumph of the Mind. And I say, each person, you have to imagine the whole human civilization depends on you. And then I elaborate a little bit. So basically, the book is trying to say each one of us has the potential to really develop their mind and be in tune with the ultimate source or energy, whatever it is. And even if you have cultures and different civilizations and different races or whatever, at the end, you as a human being, and if we all agree we are human beings who originated from Africa, then you can do a lot more and influence the whole human civilization. So,
Yes. Yes, perfect.
mm,
And it's not even so much that there are
mm,
12 structured
mm,
steps. It's kind of the holistic
mm,
existence of a paradigm that there,
mhm,
and whether we say everything started in Africa or,
mm,
mostly, or there are different
whatever.
locations, or like
Hmm.
that sort of
Mm,
content, I don't think is as important as the context, right? That there is
uh,
a structure, and we're talking about physics, which is
mm,
underlying. If you take any conversation, philosophical, biological,
mm,
economic, political, there's always an underlying pattern and structure. And
mm,
so I think the important thing, the number,
mm,
kind of answer this particular question is
mm,
that you've perceived a structure and you've taken it through logical steps,
mhm, mhm,
which doesn't really impact any other theories. It doesn't
mm.
really go, conflict with other theories, right?
Yeah,
Which
yeah,
is sign of a good theory,
yeah.
because
It's
like,
benign.
yeah, it's benign, it's at peace, and it's like, well,
Mm,
that's at least useful. And so,
mm,
and I think we talked about this before. I really like the idea of a
mhm,
beyond the fourth heritage.
mm,
So if we go from physical to emotional kind of
mhm,
beings, right? From
mhm.
animals, just physically here, emotionally
Yeah.
react, food, whatever,
Mm,
and then to more mental, right, is another
mhm,
level of stress, is the human brain advanced, and
yeah.
to think, well, what if we get beyond this mental level of thinking, and the
Mm,
enlightenment and the kind of
mm,
everything, the industrial revolution, 1700s or so, that kind of
mhm,
generated what we're living in right now and just living
mhm,
out of. It's about to end and go somewhere else. And this kind of
mm,
gets into some of my thinking on futurism.
mm,
But the point I want to make here is, what might be beyond mental. If you have physical layer,
mhm,
then the emotional layer,
mm,
not only in the arc of humanity, but inside of
mm.
ourselves simultaneously.
Wow.
Physical,
Mm,
mental, emotional. Is there,
mm,
or after the emotional is
mm,
mental, and after
mm,
that, is there perhaps like a more spiritual way to operate? Which is
mm,
not necessarily religious, which is man-made, but a connection
mhm,
to a greater guiding energy or force. And
mm,
I think this is, the most appealing
mm,
point to me that comes out of this
mm,
12-part structure, that it
mm,
indicates that it probably keeps going, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a sign of a great book, that it's not just like, oh,
Mm,
well, that was great, close.
yeah.
It's like, oh, wow, like what
It
could be
can go.
next? Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That's a very good metaphor you've picked out there. Like it can keep going, growing beyond. When I thought of the title Beyond the Fourth Heritage, I was thinking after I had written the book, The Fourth Heritage, I was trying to say this is the best identity we need to have. And so beyond, I was pretty much trying to draw that point that we need to be beyond the best we can identify ourselves and just get into the ether or whatever you call it, just
Right.
into something beyond who you think you are socially or however way you define yourself. How can you go beyond that? And it is scary stuff, but it's
Yeah.
uh it's matters of the mind. And
Yeah, I think one final point on that,
mm,
I've had this discussion with many people. How do you get
yeah,
beyond the top?
yeah,
Like, how do you
mm,
get beyond the top of a mountain is a great way to
mm,
think of it.
mm,
Well, you're not going to get beyond the mountain doing the same things you always did to get to the top of the mountain: the planning, the fitness, the
mm-hmm,
training, the
yeah,
food, the ropes,
uh-huh,
whatever, the hiking, whatever, right, all the steps you took, and now you're at the
yeah,
top. Not, well, I want to go further. How much
yeah,
of what you did is going to help? Well, maybe a little bit. You're kind of
mm,
warm and fit and got some food.
mm,
So how you get beyond the top of the mountain, how you go beyond, is you start talking about mountains, you
mm,
dream about them, you write, you expand for others, you share what it's like to be at 12 or
mm,
14,000 feet, you take pictures, you
yeah,
have a drone, then you start like getting beyond the physical, emotional and mental top, and it gets more visionary and spiritual,
mm,
of like,
mm-hmm,
why would you even climb a mountain? Why would other people do that? What's it like? What's the feeling? And this then makes it accessible to everybody, whether they climb a mountain or not, or maybe
or
their
not.
mountain is getting off the sofa and
Mm-hmm,
going for a walk. Like maybe
mm,
that's so it becomes not even about mountains, it becomes disconnected from any other
mm,
structures. So now you're
uh,
beyond the top of the mountain. I mean, this is what the world of poetry, where
mm-hmm,
poets write stuff that connect to all of humanity, and it's not really about the content, it's about
yeah,
like that context it creates that's bigger and
mm,
applies to all of humanity in the future. So this is what I
mm,
was getting at when I was suggesting
mm.
there might be a beyond.
Yeah, good. My next question I would like to ask you is, if you met someone there in a coffee shop or on the street and you were to recommend this book, why would you recommend this book to another human being that's not Gordon Montgomery?
Well, I mean, it's a pretty good forward in there, pretty
Mm,
nicely written forward. Well, I
yeah.
mean, that, I think, like you said earlier, it's personal. So, it was personal for me to be involved in the book, and kind of had the honor to look at the initial, writings. And I hadn't
Yeah.
really seen much of your writing before, to be honest. And it was
Mm,
very
mm,
powerful to see it
mm,
all come together, and get access to your personal viewpoint combined with all these more philosophical
mm, mm,
views. So those are some of the kind of reasons. I also think there's a gap in the literature. Like what you've
mm,
written, it fills
mm,
a gap in the literature, which
mm,
is, where did we come from, who are we now, and where are we going?
mm,
And I think there's a large number of people barely know their own grandparents. Like, I'm not
mm,
kidding.
mm,
Like in the Western world,
mm,
or who they are, or where, or whatever. So, and I think that's probably the number one recommendation, is to get access through a
mm,
personal journey,
mm,
to what might be beyond, the
mm,
current paradigms that we have, because
mm.
they're coming anyway. And
Yeah.
so
They're coming.
forewarned is forearmed.
Mm, mm. Okay, no, that's really very gracious of you to say that because when I was writing the book, I was thinking of people who may want to access this kind of knowledge. So, for people out there who never even thought about such big questions, but at some point in their lives, they might want to know those three questions: who are we? Where would we come from? Where could we go? I just do a good summary to be general but also specific enough that people can see my story, but they can see the evolution of my thinking, and towards
Yeah.
the end, my evolution can be their evolution. And uh,
Yes, and
yeah.
you're number one graduate at Cranfield University, MBA. I mean, it really is an evolution, and it
Mm,
really is something that people can hang their hat on. I think the
uh,
personal aspect is
uh,
super strong as a recommendation
mm,
to read this. Like, how did this
mm.
guy
Yeah,
go from here to there? And like,
yeah,
well, here's how,
yeah.
and a lot of it is mental and how you've
Mm,
approached things, and
mm,
just always a kindness and warmth and compassion about, for
mm,
yourself and for others. I think these are
mm,
what's often called soft skills in business.
mm,
So I think your book, the highest recommendation is that it's
mm,
healing for yourself, for your business,
mhm,
your society, groups
mhm,
and humanity. Like there's a real healing opportunity
mhm, mhm,
in there. People, care to read it. And like I keep kind of repeating,
mm,
I think especially for Africa right now, and
mm,
I don't know a lot about Africa. I've visited a few places, but mainly
mhm,
kind of the Maghreb, kind of
mm,
northwest. But
mm,
um, I feel that, and we talked a little bit about Uganda being the source of the Nile
mm,
and so
mm,
forth, and I believe, I believe that Africa hasn't really been on the world scene as much as, say, the
mm,
UK or US, perhaps, for whatever reason. That's just my perspective. It may well be
mm,
wrong, but
mm,
I suspect that that's going to change a lot in the future,
mm,
perhaps in partnership with the likes of China.
mhm,
So I think let's not repeat the errors of the past. It will be my kind of
mm,
secondary kind of thing to
mm,
recommend the book, because there's a potential here for a lot of power to change hands, and
mhm,
there's a real potential for the origin. I mean, mathematics came from Africa. Like
mm,
so many things
mm,
came from Africa.
mm,
Potentially, as you suggest in your hypotheses, everything
mm,
came from Africa.
mhm,
So I think there's a lot of the future tied to
mm,
Africa, and that's a
mm,
really good reason to read about the
yeah.
past, and also what's beyond that fourth heritage.
Wow, good. Thank you. The last question I have for you is, you have a son, and you educate them at your home, or you send them to school, and what points or ideas from the book do you think can impact how we should educate ourselves or our children? Education.
Mm.
Mm,
Yeah, well,
mm,
yeah, my view on education is that there is actually a total knowledge
mhm,
available, and it's tied to kind of the laws of nature, which are
mhm,
always true. We
mhm,
touched on it a bit earlier. Physics touches on it. Physics is trying to get to this kind of unity of all knowledge.
mhm,
Um, I think a lot of how we educate around the world, a lot of
mm,
it's the British system that's been kind of, or perhaps European, where, we industrialized, and then the industries needed people to be more systemically organized and trained in specific skills. And therefore we passed that down to the education kind of
mm,
part of society, and said, look, we're going to fund you, publicly, to make people stop running around doing artisanal work and working in the fields. And we want them to be, structured in a way to come into these businesses, mainly factories and so forth, wool mills and so forth,
mm,
the industry in around Manchester or in England. So anyway,
mm,
I think what the book starts to point at is, again, this more unified approach of the left and right, kind of
mm,
mentality of, there's a very strict structure. If you follow these steps, you'll reach it. And then there's also this
mm,
more energetic, all encompassing. You think of it as the masculine and feminine energies in a way. And I think there's a uniting of both of that together that could be brought to education, that this book, you know, points at, sort of beyond education, like, you know, just getting knowledge in order to do a job, I think is going to be outdated. In fact, a lot of people are talking about, you know, the useless class, a class of people for whom the new system will not have a use because they're learning skills which are exponentially out of date if you're driving a vehicle or doing any sort of retail checkout. So, or even managing those people. So, you know, education in and of itself, I think, as applied to the book, is, you know, kind of brings out more this holistic point where there is something beyond the fourth heritage. There's something beyond
the curriculum.
The curriculum, the structure, the a priori. You need those things, right? We've got to exist in 3D reality and, you know, breathe and eat. And, you know, I just think that very, very soon, probably before 2030 at this point, we're going to start to see such seismic shifts. And we're seeing this, you know, you've seen this in your MBA and, you know, I'm in a business school as well with my PhD. We need to be unlearning and unthinking, and we need people who are more, I mean, like the World Economic Forum brought out, you know, job reports about this, many different think tanks that are talking about, we've got to be creative. We've got to be able to deal with, you know, complexity like we've never seen before. You know, the global pandemic has shown us that we can reinvent ourselves, maybe not great, but we can do that quite quickly. We're going to have climate change. We're going to have many other on the stress, on what's called VUCA, VUCA, which I can't remember exactly, but, you know, kind of
volatility, ambiguity, complexity,
and uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
Yeah. And so VUCA. So yeah, as those come in on the negative side, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to not just have knowledge, but have wisdom, and to have practically applicable wisdom. And I think this you know, where do you get wisdom? Well, that almost gets into the religious domain and the spiritual domain, like understanding ethics and right and wrong, and what's a general way of approaching things, and what, you know, how do you think about the world? I think Beyond the Fourth Heritage as a book helps you think about how the world was and how it could be. I think it stops short, though, of saying, like, well, what next? Like, wow. And that's the great pull of the book, because you're like, I want to do it. I want to, you know. So I think, you know, I'm not sure what reading age this book would be, but I think anybody, any, you know, kid around,
general
you know,
knowledge,
teens, like teenage would be, you know, very appropriate. And to think about, oh, wow, like this is really how hundreds of years developed, thousands of years, and we're on that same path. Like, I think education is really, you know, you could convert Beyond the Fourth Heritage into a syllabus and educate from there, from those concepts. But we definitely got to get a different type of education that's less mechanized for industries that honestly are not going to exist in, you know, 5 or 10 years.
Okay, good. Thanks for that response. And I'm through with my questions. Maybe just to wrap it up, any closing word, statement to my viewers, parting words?
Well, read the book. I mean, read Beyond the Fourth Heritage. And I said before, like, read it before any of the others. I actually think it's, you know, to me, it's a real solidification of your thinking.
All right. So that brings the end of the interview. Thank you so much, Gordon. And for the viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this chat. As you know, everything we do on this channel, every week I bring you a video to inspire the change of mindsets, because there are so many things going on in our lives. But at the end of the day, when you change your mind, when you change your mindsets for the better, that's when you get to improve your life. So as I keep saying, the struggle is to change our mindsets. See you next weekend.